Good morning, everyone. It is the Rangers Review morning briefing, Thursday, the 14th of November. Still in the first week of the international break. Still no Derek Clark, but here we are, myself and Chris Jack, ready to talk all things Rangers. Today, we're going to be discussing Ianis Hagi. It's a podcast we've done before, Chris, but with a modern twist on it. How are you doing first and foremost? I don't know about where you are, but in Glasgow it is a beautiful day, so you can't argue with that in November.
As I said that this morning, it's a lovely day for a walk, lovely day for a game of golf. But here we are instead.
Here we are. Exactly right. Let's get into it.
International break.
Yeah, exactly. Listen, we always joke that there is always something to talk about in regards to Rangers, but there always is. There's always a player, a situation, a bit of news. And today, I think there's lots to get into with Ianis Hagi, Chris, because you've got a great article on the website that I guess summarises the situation of the summer. We know what happened in regards to the Ianis Hagi dilemma that played out over summer. He's back in the first team squad. It's been over a month now. He's not seen many minutes. He obviously had that red card when he first came back into the team. He was an unused substitute at the weekend, as well as Rangers edged past Hearts in the Scottish Premiership. But why don't you just bring us up to speed with what that piece is about, Chris? Because I guess underpinning this all is the fact that Rangers do have a bit of a creativity issue in the middle of the pitch at the moment, and they have a creative player on the bench in Ianis Hagi, don't they?
I think that sums it up. I think the situation at the weekend was perhaps quite enlightening. You look at how badly Rangers struggled to create, how much they needed that second goal just to put Hearts to bed. You then look at the changes that were made, even at half time. I think it can't be too long before we see Hagi just for something a bit different, just for someone to try and find that pass, perhaps get that goal. And he waited, and as we know, that call never came. You then see McCausland being introduced. You see Kieran Dowell, I think, is the big one that's going to kind of spark a bit of debate amongst the fans. What is Kieran Dowell? What is Ross McCausland bringing that Ianis Hagi couldn't? So I don't think we can say, and I mentioned that in that piece this morning, he's not a one-size-fits-all answer to all the problems that Rangers have. It's not a case of you put Ianis in that side at number 10 and Rangers automatically go and start winning a number of games and everything is right. I just think he's a better option at times, and certainly games like that when we know, and we've discussed it over the last couple of days, Rangers struggling to create high quality chances, struggling to score goals. You don't need to be a stats expert to know. You just need one look at the table and one look at what you've actually watched from Rangers over the course of the season to know that they're not creating enough, they're not scoring enough, and eventually that will catch up. You will feel the rough side of that. They've got away with it to an extent, which seems daft when you think that they're 9 points behind Aberdeen and Celtic. But a number of these narrow games, the 2-1s, the 1-0s, they have managed to get through them. On other days, you don't get that break. You don't win those games. And how bad does the situation look if they hadn't managed to kind of sneak those games? So I do think there's a place for Hagi within the squad. It comes down to how much Clement wants to actually use him. It felt when you actually broke the story on the website that he was back and he was back involved in the first team setup after that contract issue was resolved. I hadn't really felt that there had been a huge push from Clement in the days and weeks before that. Been asked about Hagi a number of times, and it was a case of, well, we had these discussions in the summer. The situation is what the situation is, and it's not going to change. It didn't really seem, certainly publicly, it didn't seem to be pushing it to say, well, Ianis is a player I would love to have in this team. Hopefully we can come to some agreement. So you do wonder if the manager has made up his mind almost on Hagi. He's got him as the option, but he doesn't really actually need him or want him all that much.
Yeah, there is lots to talk about in this situation, because I wonder if you kind of split it into two parts, Chris. And you can't erase history, and you can't erase the fact that Rangers at a point in the summer, and it was obviously largely tied up in that contract situation as well, but they wanted to offload Ianis Hagi. They wanted to offload a lot of players, and they managed to offload some of those, not the full extent of what an ideal situation would have been. But also, Ianis Hagi made public noises about trying to find the right club. His agents, he spoke about his agents trying to find the right club for him publicly before he went away to be a part of the Romania squad at Euro 2024. That all tied into not dissimilar noises to what we heard Clement say about, he came out publicly and said Todd Cantwell had asked to leave. Now, he didn't say that about Ianis Hagi, but he was asked about it in press conferences, and he very publicly spoke about his future. When the transfer window closed and when it materialised that Hagi was going to stay, I think there had to be some sort of realignment, because there's no use of him being in the B team. That led to this contract issue being smoothed out. Then he could come back and be part of the first team, and the appearances weren't going to have a knock-on effect and cost Rangers more money than they hoped to pay in that situation. Now, the interesting thing, as you say, is he came on. I think everyone was surprised to see Hagi come on the first or second weekend after that news broke, after the resolution was reached. It was against St Johnstone at home. He obviously got sent off in that game as well, which didn't help him. At the weekend, I don't know if it's a fact that Clement sees him as a player in the midfield three as opposed to off either wing, because Hagi has played off either wing, but it was a surprise to see him turn to Kieran Dowell there. But if you think about that St Johnstone game, Chris, and I'm going to pull up a stat that you've put in your piece, a very interesting stat about Hagi's creative numbers. If you think of his assist for Václav Černý against St Johnstone, that was the second goal Černý scored in that game, wasn't it? And it was kind of in transition. Rangers probably hadn't been great since they scored their first goal, but it was Hagi's ability to pick a pass from the midfield. And that can become slightly cliche, can't it? It can become slightly cliche, but I think in this situation it is also sort of true, because Rangers play in quite big spaces. You see that against Hearts at the weekend, because it's quite end to end, because they don't always have, they're not camped in the opposition half quite as much, because the game does become end to end. Sometimes you do just need someone to pick out a pass in space, and I actually thought that Rangers football maybe needed that in the second half against Hearts, just someone to actually generate that opportunity, instead of what happened a lot after the break was players giving the ball away. So while it was a surprise to not see Hagi come on in that kind of forward three position, was it not more of a surprise to not see him come on in the midfield? Or is that telling that Clement was trying to hold on to a one-goal lead as opposed to try and get the second goal maybe?
The fact that Dujon Sterling is your midfield sub and not Ianis Hagi perhaps says quite a lot. Maybe, as you say, speaks to the fact Clement was not happy at 1-0, but I think he outlined that after the game, that he wasn't happy with aspects of the performance, but maybe he thought we've got a better chance of winning this game by just trying to be a bit more solid and trying to see it out than we do by being a bit more adventurous and trying to get the second goal and then perhaps being caught. We've seen that situation with Rangers over the years. You know what can happen late in these games: throw-ins, corners, free kicks, people piling into the box. Rangers have come a cropper on that a number of times. So Clement was maybe thinking, we'll just be content, we'll just try and see it out, and that's why Sterling obviously has a more defensive-minded midfield option, was perhaps the call for him. As I say, I think the one of the stats that as it was in your piece yesterday about the number of shots fewer that Rangers taken this season, I think was quite interesting as well, because it shows, it ties into this creativity issue, this creativity void almost. If you're not creating chances, you're not going to take chances. If you don't take chances, the chances are you're not going to win enough games, and that's certainly the situation they've found themselves in. And it's could Hagi offer an alternative? Could Hagi offer a solution to that problem? And I think a lot of people would say yes, because he has done it before. Now, I don't think you can rewrite history and say before he got his knee injury, he was the best player in the team and he was destined to go on and be sold for many millions of pounds. He was a good player in a good side. The injury obviously had a massive effect on him. The situation with Michael Beale also then had a massive effect on him. Ended up out on loan. Didn't really go that well. Wasn't that fulfilling for him. But he's then come back, had this contact issue, and it's all just been a bit stop-start. The red card obviously was a blow, then missed a couple of games. But as outlining in that piece this morning, you're now looking at this next transfer fixtures between now and probably the Old Firm game at Ibrox. and certainly between now and the Old Firm Cup final, there's a number of games in there where you can almost predict how they're going to go, because it's going to be quite stodgy, to say at least. Rangers are not going to be, they're not suddenly going to come back from this break, turn on the style, and be this wonderful attacking, free-flowing side to watch. The games that they've got coming up, starting with Dundee United next weekend, they're going to be similar types that we've seen over recent weeks. This creativity issue is still going to be there, and does Hagi offer a potential solution to that? I think it does.
Yeah, I mean, watching the game back, I actually think that I actually thought the first half watching it back was I'm going to say something controversial here, Chris, so hold on, but I thought it was all right. And listen, there's
really controversial and say good there.
No. But you see, if you think a Rangers 5-0 win over Hearts, now we're deviating a bit, and people who've watched a lot of the Rangers review this week will not want to hear more about Rangers 1 Hearts 0. However, you remember the 5-0 win over Hearts in February. Dessler scored 2, Cortez, Diamande, I can't remember who scored. I think it was Fabio Silva off the bench. Rangers created a higher chance value, a higher expected goals against Hearts this time around than that time. Now, the performance overall, was it a good performance? No, it was really scrappy in that second half. I think you could criticise Clement for his substitutions. And I think that the way that Rangers play, because it can become, and Adam and I are going to talk about this in the Tactics podcast this week, but because when they get pinned back, they don't have that hold-up option like Danilo immediately brings from the bench, the game becomes scrappy. It's a vicious cycle. They try to get forward quickly. The ball comes back quickly. There's that saying, Guardiola's assistant says, the faster the ball goes forward, the faster it comes back. And I think that's what happened in the second half. It was rushed. It was disconnected. All that to say, there were moments that Clement will look back on and he'll say that didn't register as a shot, or the final pass wasn't played a couple of times in the second half. I think Tavernier had a shot where the free pass out wide, or a couple other opportunities that don't necessarily come to mind. He'll look at that, and that's why I think Chris is speaking about making better decisions, playing the final pass. Although, again, I think that's sometimes quite a byproduct of his style of football, because it maybe relies on players being very incisive. I don't know how, and I realise that's quite a vague thing to say, but if you think of that 5-0 win over Hearts last season, you had Cortez score from outside the box, Diamande score from outside the box, precise finishes that they're not going to do every single week. I think Dessler scored 2. He was in a purple patch at that point. One was from a long cross from a Rid van Yilmaz pass. Fabio Silva scores from the bench, and I don't know at what time he came into that game, but probably earlier than Danilo did at the weekend. But to take it back then to take it back to Hagi and Danilo on the bench, Gordon says here, we look back to Hagi's good game against Braga was about 4 years ago. Not sure how playing against kids in the B team has made them such a good player. Surely we have players in the B team, young Scottish players that should be pushing. So Gordon not having the Hagi debate. But Chris, I don't think it's necessarily a fact of saying he's the answer. He's your starting midfielder at all points. Build the team around him, etc., etc. I think there's an argument that Clement needs to maybe use his squad more, and he's not had options. His bench hasn't looked strong at large portions of the season. Again, I was surprised that Danilo only came on for 15 minutes as opposed to maybe 30 or a little bit longer at the weekend. Hagi's physicality has been held against him in the past, and especially now in this style of football, which has a lot of run-in, a lot of duels. We hear Clement speak about that often. I wouldn't say it's his optimum brand of football. However, while what Gordon is saying there, he might not be the complete answer to the player that Rangers are going to build around for the next few years. I guess the response to that might be that he's better than other options in that squad, and he certainly merits coming on to certain games at certain points where, like we said with that pass against St Johnstone, the game is broken up. It probably requires a little bit of incision, and there is space to play those passes through to the front line. That's maybe when you use them, as opposed to starting them in every single game away from home, and it does require a lot of legs in the middle.
I think to go back to the point about the younger Scottish players coming through as well, it doesn't have to be an either-or. Like, you can find a place for Hagi within this squad and give him minutes and allow him a chance to try and influence things. And I think we'd all agree we would like to see the academy produce a higher standard of player, a standard of player that can come in and actually make a sustained impact, rather than what Rangers have had over not just the last couple of seasons, but for the majority of time, over quite a long period of time. So the two things don't necessarily need to be an either or. It's not a case of an up and coming Scot or Ianis Hagi. You can't have both, and I think we would like to see both. As you say there, I don't think we were advocating Hagi being first name on the team sheet. He has to start this next run of games coming up. He has to start everyone. He has to start at number 10. I just think he can be a better squad option than the likes of McCausland at times, certainly than the likes of Kieran Dowell. You're already peering ahead to the January transfer window, which I know we're both thoroughly looking forward to. And Kieran Dowell is potentially one that you'd look to move on in that window. That could potentially offer more chances for Hagi to play, but I think he should be ahead of Dowell in the pecking order anyway. And you touched on his physicality there. I think that's a point that a lot of people do raise. Is he strong enough? Is he quick enough? He was never blessed with blistering pace before his injury. He's always had a lot of rehab work to try and get himself back up to the level. Still don't really know what level he is at. He mentioned in that club media interview he thinks his best football is still to come. At 26 or so, you would imagine that is definitely the case. It's now a question of, will that best football be in a Rangers jersey, or is it a case of his Rangers career, it's slipped away, it's been given a slight chance at redemption, if you like, but it's probably not going to happen for him. So I wouldn't hold that physicality issue against him too much. Because I know Clement has this theory of we'll play dominant, and it's a dominant style. A lot of time this season, Rangers have been fairly slow, and it has been quite a laborious build-up. It's not as if it is high tempo, high energy. They're always pressing from the front. I think Hagi could go in, and even if you can't run for 90 minutes, there's going to be times in games where even players who are not the most physically conditioned or physically robust can still have an impact, because the Rangers generally are quite slow in how they're actually going about games right now.
Well, logic would tell you I don't think Lawrence and Hagi, I don't think Lawrence is a much quicker player across the ground than Hagi, so logic would tell you that. Because Rangers have changed the midfield shape this season. They're not really playing a 4-2-3-1. It's more of a 4-1-4-1 or a 4-5-1 or a 4-3-3, depending on your persuasion. And that can, at points, you saw us against Hearts as well, lead them to be pretty deep and have 10 players around their box. But equally, I think Raskin in there is helping plug some gaps and make them look generally a bit more defensively solid. You're not seeing passes go right through the midfield as you did at points at the start of the season. But one statistic to throw your way, Chris, that you know about because it's in your piece. Expected goals is something that we bang on a lot, and some people like, and some people put a thumbs down on the video when I say that. The highest expected goals assisted is a pretty good measure of a player's creative numbers. It's looking at chances created for teammates to end in a direct shot. And Rangers' highest, if you look at their individual expected goals assisted per 90 chart, which is in that article you've done on the website this season, the highest domestically is Václav Černý, who's at 0.22. So not astronomically high, but Černy's impact is definitely felt if you look at the underlying numbers, considering his goal as well. He's at 0.22 and Bayrami is at 0.19. Next in the list is Dujon Sterling and Cyril Dessers, not two players you think of necessarily as out and out kind of creators. And you have to go right down the list to get to Lawrence, Diamande, Barron, Raskin. Ianis Hagi's expected goals assisted per 90 in the 55 season, and I know we're going back ages, but it's the last concerted period.
That's actual reference point.
Yeah. In all honesty, that was 0.21 that season, so that would place him, and again in a hypothetical world, his best then would place him kind of second in the table. Now, you might say, he played in a more dominant team, he played in a different position. And that is all true. This is put there as absolute fact. But it is to say, Chris, that I think there is some validity to people looking at that midfield three and thinking that you probably need domestically two of those, Diamande, Barron, Raskin, I would argue, unless you've got two fullbacks joining the attack as opposed to one. You probably need two of those, and then someone like a Hagi or Bayrami in that left-sided number 8 slot with ideally a winger ahead to get that balance domestically, to get enough of a creative balance on the ball. Again, Clement is hampered somewhat by the fact that he's not had Matondo and he's not had Cortez, and Ross McCausland has struggled for minutes this season. But I guess that does back up what people would see, that the midfield three probably needs that player who can pick a pass. And Lawrence was more of a goal threat than he was a creator. And that maybe is further indication that at Ibrox, you do need either a Barami or a Hagi in that midfield three, as opposed to three maybe more similar players in Diomande, Raskin and Barron, who had a very good game in Europe a few days prior, for example.
I think that one of the most interesting things that comes from those numbers and those and that sheet is, you talk about Tierney and Barami. I think people would have expected those two, if not to hold the top two spots, certainly to be in the top three. Dujon Sterling coming in third place in that list. I didn't expect to see that at all, and certainly to be ahead of Lawrence and Diomande, two guys. Also, Diomande has played number 10 over the last couple of weeks. That number 10 role, we spoke a lot about it over the summer, how Rangers needed a big upgrade in there, how they had to find someone who could not just create goals but could score goals, who could be a more dominant figure, because Lawrence had his chances in there last season, didn't really work, certainly in some of the bigger games, certainly against Celtic. Cantwell played in there at times, didn't really work, certainly in some of the bigger games like against Celtic. So there was a real issue there. I think when Barami was signed late on in the transfer window, very late on from memory of that long day, there was this expectation he'll be the guy, he'll be the 10, he'll be the final part of this jigsaw. I feel like, as you touched on there, it has been undermined by injuries. Not having Cortes, not having Rabbi Matondo, it's forced him to play from that left-hand side, has then left Clement needing another option in that number 10 role. And I think we've seen enough of Tom Lawrence to know what he's good at, what he's not good at. We know what he's going to bring. Diomande, I think we still need to see more of, certainly if he's going to play that more advanced role. I think he has to be more creative. I think he has to add more goals to his game. We don't really know what Hagi can do in a Clement side. As he touched on, we know what he can do in a Steven Gerrard side, and it was very effective. Does that translate 2-3 seasons on, 2-3 managers on? Does that translate into Hagi being able to have an impact in this side? We don't really know. I think the point that's in of that piece this morning, as we've discussed over the last 20 minutes or so, because we don't know, I think we both like to see it. If it doesn't work, you can say, well, it was worth a shot. That's probably the end of Ianis Hagi's Rangers career, and it should be moved on. If it does work, then it's a solution, and it hopefully bodes well for Rangers going forward.
Yeah, let's get to some comments. Boba Fett saying Hagi would improve the starting 11. It seems like an obvious choice. Comment here saying Hagi along with Barami, Cortes, Cherney, Matondo are pretty solid options. Hopefully Hagi gets a proper chance. Jeffrey here with a fair point, saying Hagi was a decent player on a good team. He didn't always play from the start. I'd give him a chance, but he seems to become a better player when he's not playing. They become a better player when you're not playing is, as Jeffrey points out, one of football's great myths that definitely exists in this and every discussion when a player is out injured as well. And a point here as we maybe move on a little bit, Chris, if I can find that point. Rangers not saying, why can't Clement have a different system and approach for the league? The system does not work here. I mean, the next month, we've had 3 international breaks, and don't we know it, doing these podcasts every morning. 3 international breaks in September, October, November. There's no winter break this year. There's a short kind of break, but not the winter break of the last couple of seasons. Coming up in the next couple of months, Chris, there's those 2 games against Celtic, one in the league, the Old Firm Cup final as well. Rangers go away to Nice. They have the end of their Europa League campaign. Clement isn't going to, I don't think he's going to come back from this international break with necessarily a new system. He might seem tweak things as he has with Nico Raskin's positioning. He will be hoping and trying to get as many players back fit. If you introduce Danilo into that team in some situations, he's not going to play every single game as he continues to build up his fitness. And crucially, I think if you can get an out and out, if you can get a bit of pace in that team, because it's a front three that still lacks a lot of pace, then you improve the product. But I don't think we're not going to come back from this international break and see a raft of changes. It's about from Clement's point of view, hoping that as he goes into this really defining month or so as Rangers manager, that these ideas start to click and the goals start to arrive, because Rangers are going to have to score more goals in this next month than they have in the last few if they're going to be in a better position this time next month.
No, this run coming up, it doesn't just shape this season. It shapes Philippe Clement's Rangers tenure and his Rangers future. If this next batch of games doesn't go well, we know what the reaction is going to be. We've seen it over the last couple of weeks. I think he's got little credit in the bank amongst a number of the supporters at present. You're almost waiting for that next stumble, that next negative result, because there has been fairly poor performances of late, but you can always turn around and say, well, as long as you win, then it's not okay. It doesn't make everything okay, but well, at least we've won. I think that's almost been the Clement stance at times. Well, it has been critical to an extent of performances. It has been a case of, well, at least we've won. But obviously, when you don't win those games, like Kilmarnock, like Aberdeen, that asks huge questions of the manager. I think you're looking at this next group of games, you have to be point perfect in the Premiership heading into the Old Firm game at Ibrox in January to stand any chance at all. Chances of that happening, I think, are fairly slim. You'd be a brave man to put too much money on Rangers be able to win each of those games. European ones, different equations. Trip to Nice, really tricky. Spurs at Ibrox, very, very tricky. Obviously, cup final is huge for Clement, not just because it gives them a chance to win a bit of silverware, but it's another Old Firm game. Can Rangers turn up in one of these games to have another game in that record that he doesn't win? Again, a Rangers manager that can't beat Celtic over 90 minutes and can't beat Celtic over the course of a campaign, he's no use as Rangers manager, and he won't last very long as Rangers manager. So those two Old Firm games are huge. And the board, whether they like it or not, they do have a decision to make, because we touched on the January transfer window. We're 6 weeks or so away from it. Planning will be going on at present. Do you give whatever budget is there? Do you give it to Philippe Clement during that January transfer window? If you do, you're backing him. If you don't, you have to sack him. That's as black and white as it is. Can you afford to give the manager that January transfer window, or do you make a change and give someone else that January transfer window? So they do have a big call to make at some point, and it'll be really interesting to see what particular road they choose to go down.
Yeah, Rangers have so between the football restart and the next international break. The next international break, I'm just looking here, actually isn't until early March. So we'll be looking forward to it by then. But they're home to Dundee United, away to Nice, away to St Johnstone, home to Kilmarnock, away to Ross County, all domestically games that they should win. Then it's Tottenham and the Old Firm Cup final. The game against Aberdeen is in there at some point as well. The home game against Aberdeen, not exactly sure when that is. Rangers are home to Dundee on the eve of Christmas, away to St Mirren, away to Motherwell before they host Celtic. The 2nd of January, that Old Firm game is just absolutely huge. And I think Clement is now 5 or 6 games without an Old Firm win. So huge pressure on that, Chris. Listen, it's a game every 3 days, effectively, for the next couple of months after this. So, the pressure on Rangers to get results is only going to increase. Let's see how they go. We'll be back, of course, tomorrow morning. Is tomorrow Friday, Chris? Yes.
Tomorrow is Friday. We're almost there.
We're almost there, yeah. We've got loads of stuff to still come on the website over the next few days, so people will be glad to know. We've got some tactical analysis, opinion, interview next week, all the good stuff over on the Rangers Review. We appreciate you watching as ever. Do subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't done so already, because quite a lot of people watch and are not subscribed on YouTube, Chris, surprisingly, which I didn't know until recently. So do subscribe, helps us out. It's totally free. The link to the website is in the subscription as well. Go and read Chris's piece on Ianis Hagi on the website. But until then, thank you for joining us. We'll be back bright and breezy tomorrow morning at 9:30. Stevie Clifford is here as well. Until then, thank you for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye for now.